Mercedes just got caught using a completely legal engine trick that gave them up to 4/10 per lap, and the FIA has just erased it overnight. We're talking about a hidden system inside the engine, one that passed every inspection, dominated the opening races, and helped build a massive championship lead before anyone could stop it. But here's what makes this explosive. It wasn't illegal. It was smarter than the rules. And that's exactly why it's now banned. Because with one single change in how the FIA measures the engine, Mercedes doesn't just lose speed. They lose the advantage their entire season was built on. And now, the fastest team in Formula One might not be the fastest anymore. But this is where it gets even more dangerous. Because everything Mercedes already won with that advantage still counts. Which means the real question is not what they lost. It's whether what they gained before getting exposed is already enough to win the championship. At first, no one called it a trick, because nothing about it looked suspicious. No unusual sound. No visible change. No obvious advantage you could point at and say, that's it. On the surface, Mercedes was just faster, cleaner, more efficient. The kind of performance you expect from a top team that got everything right. But underneath that performance, there was something else. Something hidden. Not in the aerodynamics. Not in the setup. But deep inside the engine. And this is where the story really begins. Because while every team read the new regulations the same way, Mercedes didn't. They didn't just read what was written. They focused on what wasn't. A missing detail. A condition the FIA never fully defined. And in Formula One, that's where the biggest advantages are born. The rule set a clear limit. A strict cap on engine compression. Designed to prevent exactly the kind of performance gap that defined previous eras. Simple in theory, but incomplete in reality. Because the rule told teams what the limit was, but never explained how that limit should behave under real racing conditions. And that's the moment Mercedes saw the opportunity. Because an engine doesn't behave the same way in a garage as it does at full speed. Under heat, under pressure, under extreme load. So instead of building an engine that simply followed the rule, Mercedes built one that adapted around it. An engine that could show one value during inspection and deliver another on track. And the way they did it was almost invisible. A tiny internal detail. A micro solution that didn't look like performance. Until it was. Because during FIA checks, everything worked perfectly. The numbers were correct. The engine sat exactly on the legal limit. No red flags. No questions. But once the race began, once temperatures rose, that same engine transformed. More efficient. More aggressive. Extracting more energy from the exact same fuel. And that difference was enough. Enough to gain tenths per lap. Enough to control races. Enough to build a lead before anyone even understood what they were seeing. And that's what made it so dangerous. It wasn't obvious. It wasn't constant. It only appeared when it mattered most. Which made it harder to detect. Harder to prove. And almost impossible to react to in time. Until rival teams started looking deeper. Because in Formula One, nothing stays hidden forever. Engineers compare data. They study patterns. And eventually, they find the anomaly. The moment where something doesn't match expectations. And in this case, that moment kept repeating. Same conditions. Same gain. Same unexplained advantage. And that's when everything shifted. Because once teams realized this wasn't just performance, it was interpretation, they stopped trying to catch Mercedes. And started trying to expose them. Not by accusing them of cheating, but by doing something much more effective. Forcing the FIA to look again. And not just at the engine, but at the rule itself. Because if the rule allows something like this to exist, then the problem isn't the team. It's the regulation. And once that idea reached the FIA, the clock started ticking. Because now, it wasn't a question of if something would change. It was when. And for Mercedes, that timing was everything. And when the FIA finally looked again, everything changed. Because this time, they weren't just checking if the engine was legal. They were asking a much more dangerous question. Is the rule actually working? At first, the answer wasn't obvious. On paper, everything still passed. The engine met the limit. The numbers were correct. Nothing violated the regulation as it was written. But that was exactly the problem. Because what looked correct on paper didn't match what was happening on track. And that gap became impossible to ignore. So the FIA did something they rarely do mid-season. They didn't accuse. They didn't penalize. They investigated the rule itself. And what they found changed the entire situation. Because the regulation defined the limit, but never defined the conditions under which that limit had to be respected. No temperature. No real operating scenario. just a static measurement. And that's where Mercedes had built their entire advantage. Not outside the rules, but inside an incomplete version of them. So the FIA made a decision. A simple one, but devastating. They added the missing condition. They required the engine to meet the same limit, not just in controlled checks, but in real operating temperatures. The exact environment where performance actually exists. And with that one change, the entire system collapsed. Because the moment you measure the engine under real conditions, the trick no longer works. The extra performance disappears. Completely. Not reduced. Not limited. Gone. And this is the moment Mercedes realized the reality. Because this wasn't a warning. It wasn't a discussion. It was final. The loophole was closed. The advantage was over. And there was no way around it. Because unlike a setup change, or an aerodynamic tweak, this wasn't something you could adjust overnight. This was built into the core of the engine. Its behavior. Its efficiency. Its entire philosophy. And removing it means starting again. In the middle of a championship. And that's where the pressure explodes. Because now Mercedes is facing something they didn't expect to face this early. A complete shift in performance. Not because they got worse, but because everyone else just got closer. Instantly. And on the other side of the grid, the reaction is immediate. Relief. Opportunity. Belief. Because for the first time this season, Mercedes no longer has that hidden edge. Now they are just fast. Not untouchable. And in Formula One, that difference is everything. Because once a dominant team becomes reachable, they become beatable. And once they become beatable, they become a target. And that's exactly what's happening now. Every team pushing harder. Every driver taking more risks. Every race becoming more aggressive. Because they know something Mercedes is only now starting to feel. The safety margin is gone. And without that margin, every mistake matters more. Every weakness becomes visible. Every race becomes a fight. And that leads to the most important shift of all. Mercedes is no longer controlling the season. They are reacting to it. And in Formula One, that's when everything starts to change. And that shift is where the real damage begins. Because losing an advantage is one thing. But losing control? That's something else entirely. At the start of the season, Mercedes dictated everything. Pace, strategy, race rhythm. Other teams reacted to them, adjusted to them, tried to survive against them. But now, that dynamic has flipped. And you can feel it, not just in lap times, in behavior. Because suddenly, Mercedes is no longer managing races from the front. They're defending, watching mirrors, covering strategies, reacting to moves instead of creating them. And that changes the entire psychology of a team. Because when you're leading comfortably, you take calculated risks. When you're under pressure, you avoid mistakes. And that difference costs performance. Drivers feel it first. The car doesn't give the same confidence, the same predictability. That extra margin that allowed them to push is gone. So braking points become safer. Throttle application becomes more cautious. And those tiny adjustments? They add up. A tenth here, another there. Until suddenly, you're no longer ahead. You're fighting. And on the other side, everything accelerates. Ferrari is no longer chasing a ghost. They are chasing a real, beatable car. Red Bull is no longer guessing where the time is. They can see it, measure it, attack it. And that clarity is dangerous. Because once teams know where the gap was, and know that it's gone, they don't hesitate. They push harder, upgrade faster, take more risks. Because now there's something real to fight for. And this is where momentum changes. Not in one race, but across several. A second place becomes a third. A win becomes a battle. A comfortable lead becomes fragile. And inside Mercedes, they see it happening in real time. Because the data doesn't lie. The gap is shrinking. The advantage is gone. And the trend is moving in the wrong direction. But here's the part that makes this even more intense. They cannot fix it the way they fixed problems before. There's no quick upgrade. No easy gain. Because the advantage they lost was not a component. It was a concept. And concepts take time to rebuild. Time to understand. Time to replace. And time is exactly what they don't have. Because every race now is one step closer to being caught. One step closer to losing the lead they built when everything worked perfectly. And that creates a countdown. Not an official one, but a real one. Because everyone in the paddock knows it. If Mercedes doesn't find something new, they will be caught. It's not a question of if, it's when. And that brings everything to a single, unavoidable point. Because now, this is no longer about the engine, or the loophole, or the rule. It's about resilience. How a dominant team reacts when dominance disappears. Because this is the part Formula One doesn't show often. Not how teams win, but how they survive when they stop being unbeatable. And this is where everything leads. Not to the rule, not to the loophole, but to the final test. Because now, Mercedes is facing the one situation every dominant team tries to avoid. The moment where the advantage is gone. And the results still need to come. Because here's the reality no one can escape. The championship doesn't care how you started. It only cares how you finish. And right now, Mercedes is entering the most dangerous phase of the season. Not because they are slow, but because they are no longer safe. That gap they built early, that cushion that made everything feel controlled, is now under constant pressure. Every race, every lap, every corner. And the difference is subtle, but critical. Before, they could afford imperfection. Now, they can't. A slightly slow pit stop. A small setup mistake. A strategy that doesn't work perfectly. Before, those things didn't matter. Now, they cost positions. And eventually, they cost championships. Because while Mercedes is trying to hold on, their rivals are doing something much simpler. They are just getting faster. No rule change against them. No system removed. No reset required. Just pure progression. And that's the imbalance. Mercedes had to take a step back, while everyone else kept moving forward. And in Formula One, that's enough to change everything. But here's the final twist. The one detail that connects this entire story. Mercedes may no longer be the fastest team, but they might still be the smartest one. Because they didn't just exploit the loophole. They exploited the timing of it. They knew the rule would eventually be closed. They knew the FIA would react. But they also knew something more important. It wouldn't happen immediately. So they used that window perfectly. Those first races, where everything worked, where the advantage was at its peak, where no one could stop them. That was not just dominance. That was strategy. Because they weren't just racing their rivals. They were racing the rule itself. And for a moment, they won. But now, that race is over. The rule has caught up. The advantage is gone. And only one thing remains. The points they already secured. Which means everything comes down to one final question. Not whether Mercedes was exposed. Not whether the trick was banned. But whether they built enough of a lead before the system closed in on them to still win the championship in the end.